Wow, that was a little bit too much. Thanks everyone for being here. And I'm more used to my friends introducing me more like, Federico is from Argentina, lives in Copenhagen, and works doing something with sound and design. And what I normally add is like, basically I'm a service designer, I work for a hearing aid company, which is called WSA, and we help develop like the technology that gives back hearing to those with hearing loss. And if anyone's interested, we are looking for designers, so please check the career. I think that me and my colleagues, we are gonna be happy to hear from you. But this brings to the question is like, how many of you have the same challenge I have? It's like, how many of your friends do not know what a service designer does? Can you raise your hand? Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, at work, and my friends, they know that I drink mate because I come from Argentina. But like, if they need to explain what a service designer does, they have no clue. So imagine when I tell them that I've been exploring like service soundscapes. This is the reaction I get. It's like, so where can we start? How can I bring you to this rabbit hole that is, for me, soundscapes? Let's start from the end. So silence occurs only at death. Spooky, eh? Well, this is because even if we are in a very quiet place, like there's two sounds that we are always going to be able to hear as long as our hearing capacity is functioning, which is our breath and our heart. So for example, here I have one of my colleagues in an anechoic chamber. It's one of these chambers that are designed basically to remove all the reflections and the echoes and so on. And even if you go there, you can literally hear your breath. So that's how I can say that silence occurs only at death. But this brings a different challenge. What do we mean when we ask for silence? I'm going to propose to explore this question, to listen. We're going to listen to this environment, and those who are online, I'm going to ask you to listen to the sound environment where you are. So if you can scan this QR code, and you're going to access to a soundscape mapping form. And I'm going to give you some time to listen to the sound environment you are, and to choose one sound, and then fill in the form based on how you experience that sound. But first, I'm going to use my voice here as an example to show you how would I fill it up. Remember, it's about the way that you perceive a sound. So, if you're mapping this soundscape here where you are in person, please choose first Berlin. And if you're online, just please choose the online soundscape. Then, for example, how would I name my voice? It's like enchanting a soulful voice. You don't agree? Okay. Well, it doesn't matter because, as I said, what is important is the way that we perceive it. It's how we perceive that sound. So just remember that when you're feeling it. There's no right or wrong answers. It's how you perceive the sounds that you're hearing. But what is generating the sound? Okay, well, we can say I will say a keynote speaker on stage. But then the form is going to ask you, how would you characterize this sound? And I was like, okay, it's natural, it's human, maybe it's another subcategory, maybe a mix of both. Well, I will consider myself on the human spectrum, and maybe I would say a person talking with a microphone. And then I will reflect as okay, how do I perceive that sound? In which space? And I will say in this case, here in this context, I will perceive it in the foreground. It's very present. Clearly, it would be really rare someone that can hear that don't notice that I'm speaking in front of all of you. But maybe you can say okay, when you're listening, maybe you choose a sound that you will only notice as long as you are doing this exercise. And I will consider that in normal circumstances, it will be a background sound. And yes, as you guess, everything in between, we put in the middle ground. Maybe something that you might notice once in a while, but then your brain will let pass. Finally, how do you perceive it? Well, I'll perceive my voice 4 in this context. Why? Because for me, sounds really funny or weird hearing my own voice through the speakers in this context. And then what is making possible that the sound of my voice is here today in this context? Well, basically, the team that is running the conference. Why? Because they invite me to give this talk. By the way, thanks. And once you fill it up, all the forms, just please press submit. There you go, my English is coming back. And if you feel like you have time and you want to choose another sound and fill it again, please do it. The most important thing is to take the opportunity to listen, choose a sound, and see how do you feel about it and how you perceive it. Okay? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Just listen, choose a sound, and fill the form with that sound, and let's see what happens. Okay? There you go. Okay, probably one of the quietest talks so far, I guess, in the conference. But thanks for joining the initiative. Like, now I'm going to ask you for one more thing before I'm going to keep talking and introducing you into this rabbit hole that is for me like soundscapes. Please we're going to do a little bit less than a minute to share with someone, please, someone you don't know, which sound did you choose, how did you perceive it, and why. Try to choose someone that you don't know, maybe someone is behind you or next to you, so make it more interesting. Try to use 15, 20 seconds, and if you are online, please share it on the chat so other participants can also see it, and I'm going to be looking forward to see what you guys share. Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need your attention here again. And first of all, your voice is a lot nicer, and I perceive it a lot better than my own voice here. And so, thanks. But, okay, I hope that this helped to at least explore a little bit the question that we started with. It's like, what do we mean when we ask for silence? And I hope that you keep this conversation going after the talk. But for example, did any of you know what a soundscape is? Or for example, like a person's constructural perception of the sound environment. Basically, all the sounds in one place. So basically, a soundscape is a subjective. So how many soundscapes do we have here? We have as many soundscapes as each of you. So that also means that the way that all of you are going to perceive the different sounds in this context, in this moment, is going to be different based on your background, your experience, your mood, and so on. This is also very important because it's going to affect the way that you feel, the way that you're going to interact, your well-being, your health, and many other things. So this is also important because this is what happens when we are designing services or services associated with the urban environment, that maybe we are not contemplating this. And there's a lot of interactions and ways that we perceive it, the sounds that could affect us in one way or another. This also means that we need to move away from just measuring the sound pressure levels in places and trying to make disappear all sounds, but the only thing that it's doing is taking us closer to away from life, based on the argument that I presented earlier, and start trying to understand the nuances and the granularity and the qualitative aspects of sound in services and service touch points. And also notice, for example, might be some positive aspects of it. For example, this is a very quiet place. Well, now I can hear some music on the background. But we can consider maybe that for us is noise if we are trying to focus on this. But at the same time, I was thinking, it's like, this is kind of like too quiet. Maybe a little bit of water running on the side will make like the whole thing a little bit more relaxed and more chill to talk about. So that could be a different way of approaching this place. The challenge we face, most of the science disciplines, we've been focusing over the years in a very visual way of approaching problem solving. And we move away to using other senses, like sound. And even though there has been some researchers and practitioners that try to bring other senses, and for example, sound, as for example, Serwin that have quoted soundscape thinking, which is basically contemplating the experiential opportunities of the sound environment of a place, but bringing it to the design process. So basically, that's my rabbit hole. I think 2 years ago, more or less, I started with the thesis when I was in Aalborg University, doing my master's in service system design. I was working at that point with Gale Architects in the R&D team. And we were talking about, like, okay, how service design methods can like facilitate soundscape thinking, like contemplate the sound environment for city makers and the projects that they work, and how to involve the different actors and so on. So we chose a football stadium as a service. Basically, football match, people buy a ticket, shows to the football match, attends with friends and so on, from A to Z. Because a football stadium also has a private space in the urban place, there's a private associated on the signs, there's like a semi-private, semi-public spaces, and also non-public and non-private spaces. And also it's a context where different cultures, different expectations, and the neighbors are involved and so on. What we did, we have some expert interviews and 2 participatory design workshops, one with the experts and the city makers at the urban design consultancy, and one with some users in an actual football match, in the actual touch point that we were exploring. But Very quickly, I realized that we have a challenge with sound. I don't know if you notice, we all speak about sound in a different way, especially when it comes to how we perceive it. And that is a huge challenge when we try to apply a process like design, like engineering. If we don't speak the same language, we might misunderstood what we mean. So I decided to, okay, let's try to figure out what is the minimum share vocabulary related to soundscapes that we can agree on, so we can like start mapping, sketching, and mapping and sketching like potential soundscapes. For that also, I borrow the strategies and the soundscape strategies and soundscape actions that a PhD from Sweden came out during his PhD process. Because what I realized as well is like not everyone is used to working with sound. And sometimes one of the things that I notice quickly is it takes longer. As you notice, it takes a little bit to change your mindset and say, okay, now I'm gonna listen. Oh, I noticed this. And now I need to, how do I perceive it? And then I write it. When we are sketching something visual, it's like you look and you sketch at the same time. So that's how I started. But what did I learn? What did I learn that maybe could be helpful for you? I realized that establishing a shared vocabulary probably was the best idea I had, because it becomes very complex. As soon as we start talking about how we perceive sound, it could become very complex. And if we don't agree on what we mean, for example, in the concept of noise. What is noise? Basically, it's an unwanted sound. It's a sound that we don't want for whatever the reason it is. Right now, the music that we were hearing a moment ago, it was just noise for us because we are trying to focus on what I'm saying right now. But for the people that was playing, it was perfectly fine. It's the sound that they wanted to hear. And just moving away from noise and speaking, this is a sound that we want in this place, or this is a sound that maybe it's unwanted right now in this context, it facilitates a complete different conversation and opens different opportunities in the moment to make decisions in the design process. It was important to tweak the user journey map because currently, we needed to somehow contemplate the different aspects of the soundscape. So we need to aggregate, add lanes to identify which touch points actually have a soundscape that are relevant for this service, for example. And in this case, we agree on focusing on the 4 touch points associated from the metro station, in between the metro station and the perimeter of the football stadium. Then there's kind of like an area which is you are within the football stadium, but you're not really in the entry, like your gate, basically. And then there's a space where you have the gate, right? Those are kind of like the main 4 touch points. And what is also important to contemplate that is because we perceive the different sounds environments also in the way that we transition from one to the other. I don't know if you notice, but when we walk here in, at least at the beginning, we were chatting a little bit in the elevator, but as soon as we walk inside here, it felt like, wow, very quiet. And probably it felt a lot more quiet because we were talking before. If maybe no one was talking in the elevator, probably it wouldn't have been such a big difference. Sorry for those watching online, that was a very in-person example. But then it was important to contemplate the time frame. Soundscapes and sound is very attached to time. You cannot separate them. So it's not the same in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, on a Monday, on a Tuesday, during the week, during the weekend. Different seasons are going to bring different sounds. For example, even if you have wind, in winter in many places, the leaves disappear from the trees. So the sound that is going to be generated by the wind in the trees is going to be different to the one that you can hear when the tree has leaves. And it's going to be perceived probably in a different way as well. Then we learned that recording, even if they are like very low resolution references of the soundscape or the sound environments that you are like trying to explore and try to map and redesign, it's very valuable because it gives you a little bit of a different perspective. It helps you to remember a little bit that temporality and how it was in comparison to what has been mapped. Then the key sounds and actors, maybe this is one of the things that I believe that is really important, is maybe not all sounds are the most relevant in a service, but there's some that really bring that touch point or that service very alive. And then what is important about that is like, the form was saying, okay, what is facilitating this sound? What is allowing these sounds to happen? The idea is to reflect about the actors that actually facilitate a sound to exist. And that could be maybe sound designer, designing a system, and then the people in charge of controlling that sound system in a place, that it plays it, and someone that maintain it, but also could be a conference team that invites a speaker to speak, or the speaker asking you to collaborate and talk to each other. That's gonna create it. What we cannot control is the way that it's gonna be perceived, because that's gonna change based on whoever participates. Yet, we can map how different people in a similar context, in a similar time, with a similar purposes in a certain touch point, might perceive the most key sound elements in that environment. And we can identify which are the points in common and maybe try to introduce unwanted sounds that could be identified there and reduce some unwanted sounds. And in some cases, it's just to move some things and some features from one place to another to start with, and then see how it's perceived afterwards. And that would be contemplating the potential actions and like strategies that even users can tell us, oh, maybe we can move this and this because I perceive it like this, and this is kind of the experience I want to have. And well, I already spoke about the plan. It's when we talk about like soundscapes, they are always associated to a place, because we can argue that when we are hearing something on our headset, it's going to be like a soundscape. But like we can also say that that's going to be like some sound source within a different sound environment that is going to include whatever that person is listening to that music with the headset, for example. Next step, we need to tweak it also like the service blueprint. Why? Because once we can identify some key sounds of a touch point, also this can make us reflect about like, okay, which could be like the sound evidence of this touch point in this service. And also maybe we can build like a narrative or an experience that is guided by the sounds. And also some things will require backstage actions to facilitate those sounds. For example, in the case of the stadium, we learned that there were some food trucks, and people was interested about like they like all the sounds related to people buying beer, selling beers, and promoting some things. Yet they mentioned that they had been in different stadiums, and they were more interested in the very local cries of the sellers, because they were more they were more like kind of they saw it as part of that culture, which in Copenhagen Stadium it doesn't happen. And actually, the case that I used to compare, it was like Boca Juniors Stadium, La Bombonera. I don't know how many of you know, but probably the best stadium in the world, arguably. And but it's a very vivid experience. When you go there, it's a carnival. Like it's the entire neighborhood is alive and celebrating and singing, and everyone is screaming like, you can buy this, you can get the other thing. There's an interaction the whole time, which it has its pros and cons. It's very part of the culture of that neighborhood. So probably a lot of people, at least some of that I hear, is like they took it as part of living there, which maybe in Copenhagen, if you have the exact same experience, might not be perceived in the same way by the neighbors. So it's also about trying to find balance. And of course, like it's important to contemplate in the service blueprint, which are like the soundscape strategies and actions, and who could like facilitate them in the service. Starting to wrap up, And one of the key learnings is like all this process, and within both workshops, it was easy to see how just bringing the topic of sound, it really helped. Bringing like a shared vocabulary, it make easier for people to understand what they mean when they refer to certain things. And very quickly, they saw opportunities on the value that we could be co-created, just contemplating sound in a design process. And yes, the recordings was something that I would have loved to explore more, because we use a lot of visual cues. And one of the reasons why I don't have so many visuals is because text is the closest to sound I can do in a visual, basically. And yeah, it's like recordings, it could be interesting like to bring sound more as an element to design and explore more. There's a lot of like, for example, data sonification and like visualizing sound in data as well and backwards. There's many ways to use sound. 3 key learnings. And what I hope is that at the end of this talk, you start talking about sounds that you want, sounds that you maybe not want in different service touch points, and maybe to contemplate which touch points of the services that you are designing could benefit for contemplating the way that is perceived the sound environment. And one thing is, it's not that hard to realize the value it could bring in certain services contemplating the sound environment. That was one of the key learnings. Then this method, which is far from perfect, what you just experienced with the form is an iteration, 3rd or 4th iteration of the original toolkit that was made out of paper. And it's one way of doing it. What I think that is the most important thing is to remember is soundscape is our personal way of perceiving a sound environment. Then it could be different ways of approaching it. This is the way that we are proposing. And maybe reflect about, maybe there's opportunity for service designers as service soundscapers. You know, maybe a team of soundscapers that could be focusing on certain services where sound is really relevant, just to focus on like, okay, how is perceived the sound environment in different touch points and what can we do to improve it? So this is also a way that we can not only bring another sense that we have in the way that we design services, but also this open a lot of conversations related to what is sustainable, like, because if you want to bring a specific bird to a place because people appreciate it, also it might imply that you need like probably a native plant to be around because that's the one that the bird wants. And also it will bring conversations about how different sounds are perceived in different cultures, which it helps to make a more diverse approach to it. And just having the conversation about sound and soundscapes, I noticed that it helped to have more inclusive conversations because we perceive the sound environment of a place with all our cultural backgrounds, our experiences, how we see life, and so on. And that also like helps to make more like inclusive conversations in the design process. But to wrap up, thank you very much for listening. And if you're interested, please come afterwards. I'm happy to keep talking about my favorite rabbit hole. And feel free to connect in LinkedIn if you're interested. And on the right, it's a link to the paper that we co-authored with Luca Simeone, where basically is the base of this presentation. Thank you very much.